Hello everyone, if this is your first talk with us today, then welcome to the Sales Enablement Festival. And for those of you who've already been tuning in to our selection of talks, welcome back. We have so much more amazing content heading your way, but before we get back into it, we just want to take this moment to thank all our amazing sponsors and partners for bringing this virtual festival to life. We also want to thank you, our attendees, for joining us today. If you're enjoying the content from the festival, be sure to check out the SEC membership plans. It's here where you can gain access to exclusive content, research and frameworks, and discounts to things like our brand new workshop series and so much more. You can find more information about this over on the Sales Enablement Collective website. Don't forget to have your questions ready for the live Q&A at the end of this talk, as you'll have the chance to put them to the experts themselves. That's everything from me, so all that's left to do is sit back and enjoy this next talk.
And welcome to the session about enabling sales team during hyper growth in a global environment. First of all, thank you for taking the time. We will speak a bit about a unique business environment and also how sales enablement will look like in such an environment. First off, a few facts about GoStudent in the past 18 months. The past 18 months were one of the most intense hyper growth phases that we have seen so far. And we went basically from 20 sales reps to 416 markets. We went from 40 employees to around 1,000, more than 1,000 by now, in 18 international offices, and got a unicorn status in this summer, and are currently going by a growth of 20 to 30% per month. Now, what does hypergrowth mean? Hypergrowth is basically a conflict between efficiency and speed. So it means that on the one hand, we are going very fast, we are moving with light speed, and on the other hand, this can sometimes mean that we are lagging behind in terms of efficiencies, in terms of systematization, in terms of processes. And this is exactly where sales enablement comes in to build the foundations for hypergrowth and also to continuously reinforce the speed and make it even faster. Generally, you see at a certain stage a tension between a startup that goes with a certain philosophy and that also goes with a certain mentality, and that is minimal structure in order to go fast, not to get too bothered by bureaucracy, by processes, and so forth. And this is what a startup makes successful. At some point, though, you reach the scale-up stage, or let's call it the threshold that leaps over to the scale-up stage. Here you start to realize that the more structure you can actually bring in, the less things you have to fix down the road, and the less things will basically slow you down further down the line. So this is a tension that is okay, a tension that is natural, a tension that also creates what I would call creative friction. It's also the source of innovation. It's also the source of moving forward, of constantly becoming better. For us, that also means it's a tension that we need to be okay with and that we need to work with. There's a lot of creative potential in that chaos that propels us forward as well. And I will speak about the balance between those further down in the presentation. We're basically dealing in a hypergrowth environment with what some of you already know as a so-called VUCA environment. For those of you who are not familiar with the terms, in a linear environment, you have low volatility. Think about the store next door that sells you the newspapers. There's low uncertainty, right? Everything is pretty predictable, low complexity, and low ambiguity, right? It's a world of black and white where things, processes, structures, the business environment is quite clear-cut. On the other hand, in a hypergrowth environment, you will experience high volatility. Things can move up, down, left and right, and diagonally in all directions, and you will barely find your bearings. High uncertainty. It's not always predictable what is going to happen next, and you will definitely face a high level of complexity that is just a natural consequence of scaling. It is a natural consequence of more and more people getting involved, and of more and more locations being opened there, and more stakeholders being involved as well. All of this also leads to an environment that is highly ambiguous. And it also takes a certain approach to this ambiguity because, it's not necessarily what we are used to or even what we are trained to deal with in our regular traditional school education. Ultimately, what we want to, what interests us most is how do we leverage that chaos, right? Because we could stay in that linear environment on the left-hand side. We could run our small store, or we take the risk, we take the leap, we dive right into an hypergrowth environment and also achieve things and reach heights that are not achievable otherwise. This journey from startup to scale up, that's by no mean a final process or something that ends anywhere, but a continuous process because it happens on multiple levels and in multiple speeds, was accompanied by the sales enablement team here at Go Student. So in retrospect, we kind of identified a few phases that we were in, and coincidentally, they all lasted 6 months. So this also gives us a framework that we could share and a framework that allows us to repeat what we did in similar environments. The first phase could be described as building. This is when I joined as a one-person sales enablement manager in May last year. And I will go into the details of what we did and how it went and how we started to form the early team. The next stage was scaffolding. So really holding the show together when things were breaking apart on all sides and chaos reigned. The next stage was scaling. Once we got some stabilization, we really used that momentum, the processes and the systems to accelerate in speed and ultimately reaching performance where we kind of reached the first half a mile, and we are now actually accelerating in performance mode. So how did this all go down? I already mentioned the building phase. When we started around 1.5 years ago, it was all about laying the foundations for scale, building systems for repeatable success. It is great if we know that sales rep X, Y, or Z knows how to sell and kind of got it and is a high performer. But what we are more interested in is how can we learn the lessons from the sales rep, make them accessible and scalable for everybody in the company, especially new people who are being onboarded. Another huge thing was making English the official company language, and that might not be something on the top of the agenda initially, but it was a move that definitely turned out to bring a lot of benefits down the road and actually enabled the scale. After arriving, what was really important was to first centralize institutional knowledge. There's a lot of knowledge in the heads of all of us. We all know how things work. It's implicit. We learn things by trial and error, but often we are not even able to fully explain why and how things work the way they work. By centralizing knowledge, and especially institutional knowledge, we also make sure that the success continuity does not depend on one individual person, but it depends on a system. And in that way, it basically makes that knowledge, makes to more people. One of the hard pieces of sales enablement at that early stage, though, was onboarding. Creating an onboarding process, creating an onboarding structure, a program. Why is onboarding so important? You can hire people and just throw them into the work, and they will find their way around at some point. But what you will never get really is a coherent culture, a coherent focus, a coherent alignment of efforts into one direction. The onboarding, on the one hand, is skill set building. It creates the foundation for the craft. But on the other hand, and probably even more important so, it creates culture and it sets expectations. When I come to the company, this is the first impression I get. This sets the tone for my career at that company. So the onboarding is something we have to nail from the get-go. And very important thing is also expectation settings. We just talked about the hypergrowth environment. It is not what many people are used to, and people need to be fine with this. And if people have the right expectations from the get-go, they can also learn how to thrive there. But if they have an expectation to go into a linear environment and then figure out that everything is chaotic, accelerated, and goes really fast, that could be quite a shocker. So setting culture, setting the expectations. About culture. We strongly believe that high performance is not a result of pushing people, of pressuring them just for the sake of it. Like, you don't get high performance out of people by telling them, work harder, you suck, you're not good enough. This is not the way how you create high performance culture. High performance culture has to trigger intrinsic motivation. People are staying up late, are working really hard out of their own will because it gives them something, it enriches them, and not because they are pressured to do it or scared to do it, ideally. So what does a high performance culture consist of? Obviously, some people are motivated by money, rightly so, but also even more so being part of an elite team. Purpose and a higher cause that really ties into your company mission as well. Is your product, is your service, is your mission something that really gets people excited? We know that every single sale we are doing is helping a family and a student to unlock the full potential for their self-determined future. A sense of community, right? Being in the presence, being in the community of high performing colleagues all over the world, overcoming challenges, right? It's not necessarily something that people are completely avoidant of. A lot of us, we seek challenge, but we are not talking about challenge for the sake of it. We talk about overcoming challenge. And it also means being given the right tools, resources, and training and knowledge in order to overcome those challenges. And ultimately, professional growth, which ties into that. And it also means that leaders on all levels take the time to make the employees better and professionalize what they're doing, so they also feel they are growing and not stagnating. In our view, this is what drives high performance. This is what brings out intrinsic motivation in people, and that's also the environment that we want to create, and onboarding is one of the tools to do so. I already announced we dived right into scaffolding. How so? We had a lot of market launches at the same time. So many different local languages and local cultures as well, new people joining the company. And the more chaotic the environment becomes, the more important it is that we focus on our core mission and also an awareness of our core mission. So we defined a mission statement for ourselves. What do? We empower sales teams to sell bigger packages faster and with less effort. And based on that, we will also align our initiatives, and we will work towards that purpose. This is super important because at this stage, if we are not clear about what we are trying to achieve, all of our initiatives, efforts can go completely to waste and can just be scattered and fragmented all across the board. We introduced a sales script and worked here very closely with the markets together. And what was important here is to bring the trial and error approach. I figured out how to sell, I kind of know what to do, to systematizing it, finding the best selling practices, adding proven methods to the mix, and also having one consistent sales methods that people can be trained on. Because if you do not have that, then it quickly can turn to the Wild West, and it will definitely hurt the predictability of the sales performance as a whole. Quality assurance, of course, goes into professional growth as well. We also learned pretty quickly that we had to think of many systems, including the commission structure, to make it more scalable across multiple markets, right? What worked at one stage of the company doesn't work 6 months later when there's a completely different environment. So it also required of us to constantly challenge ourselves to think about what actually of what we have in place in terms of structures and processes belongs to a long gone era, like 5 months ago, that is simply not applicable anymore. Ultimately, in all of these market launches, we quickly saw a need for localization. So we started building the sales enablement team along the lines of cultures, languages, and cultural expertise, so that we have sales enablement partners who could work with the different markets and also make sure that all the resources that we have get there in a localized way. In terms of processes and structures, there can be two extremes and also two triggers that can get people really paranoid. The one is the Wild West, with no structures or little structures and processes. You always create downstream costs of time, attention, and friction for all those departments and people who have to fix the messes. There's a concept called total cost of ownership. So that means you might achieve something in the short run, but you have a lot of cost mid and long run due to all of the frictions that this one short-term win caused. On the other hand, you have the other negative extreme, which is a bureaucracy. Bureaucracy that's overregulated, too many rules, basically just kills innovation, creativity, and progress, and is absolutely detrimental to the success of the company. So moving away from those two extremes, remember, high uncertainty, low uncertainty, ambiguity, we are looking for the golden middle. And that's a constant, also how we see it, a constant two-way negotiation with reality. We need to understand what our situation is, and we need to act accordingly. We cannot look into the textbooks what sales enablement is and how to apply it in a company. We have to ask ourselves daily the question, how does successful sales enablement look like at GoStudent? And we need to be able to come up with these answers. And these answers might change every 3 months. And it is important that we keep this in mind and that we find the right balance of structures that keep us at a scalable level, but also structures that do not turn us into a bureaucracy, where the process doesn't make any sense anymore. On this basis, we moved into scaling, and we're joined by the VP of Sales. So a lot of what we did before that was basically figuring it out, and now we were integrating ourselves into the strategic framework of the VP of Sales and the mid and long-term vision that we are pursuing. Also, we figured for ourselves that in order to be most successful, we need to be impartial, which basically means we are not particularly assigning resources to one specific market permanently, but we assign resources on a global scale, and we pursue an objective of global long-term success of the company, not the success of one particular market at the expense of others or anything like this. No, we pursue the global long-term success, and it also means that we need to act accordingly, and we need to align all of our initiatives towards these purposes. It ultimately means the more we scale and the more markets are added to the mix, the more people are also joining. On the right upper hand side, you see the amount of team members that we had at this stage already. 15, which is our current setup, and 3 in Latin America. And we now needed to move into getting things done through processes. While in the earlier stages of building and scaffolding, a lot had to go through personal relationships and buy-in and negotiations, basically. Now we actually moved into a stage where we need to get things through processes done, and where we need to think very critically, what should these processes be? As a general rule, we set it up for ourselves that we say we build a process, we manage it initially, we then decentralize it and spread it out over many stakeholders, and then we find a way to automate it by software, ideally. Right? A pretty quick example would be all first level IT support for sales tools would be on the shoulders of one of our team members initially, right? So we had a structure, it was managed by one person. So we said this is not sustainable anymore with 300 employees at that point. We need to decentralize. So we trained all of our team members in the sales enablement team to be able to do the same tasks, set up a ticketing system, and basically made a scalable process out of it. Added wikis, FAQs, and so forth to automate it, right? And this is basically the way to go with many processes. We always have to have the idea of scale at the back of our minds. We started building regional sales enablement hub, or better yet said, to restructure our existing setup into regions, and then have sales enablement teams who are responsible regionally. So yes, we have the global long-term responsibility and objectives, but we also execute on a regional level. And that also means for our team to enable our enablement colleagues, not only in sales enablement, but also in other sales enablement departments, for example, customer success and others. We ultimately found at this stage that to move fast and to keep up the speed of hypergrowth and process implementation, we needed to work more directly with team leads who are on the ground, who are looking into the faces of the sales reps on a daily basis. This is basically for force multiplication. We cannot be there, we cannot be everywhere at the same time centrally, right? We need to make sure that we put something in place that moves by itself, that multiplies by itself. And that is ultimately our frontline leaders in the sales teams. And it also means for us, it's not our job, and it was never, to manage individual sales reps, but we work through team leaders and sales leaders in order to give them all the tools, resources, processes, and so forth to do that themselves. And that is a very important, let's call it, philosophical distinction. We need to be clear about this and also align our initiatives accordingly, right? My philosophy is, if you do not define roles and responsibilities, one of two things happens: either everybody steps on each other's toes, or important work is being left unattended because nobody feels responsible. So also defining these roles, defining these clear-cut responsibilities is an important step in this stage of scaling. What we how we have worked so far in this regard was that we got really involved in the initial stages of projects or market launches, and then would scale down our involvement over time, but at the same time build up our frontline sales team leaders, enable them also to train their own team members, so that also that does not need to be centrally managed. But in the concept of train the trainers, enable the enablers, coach the coaches, that we would also provide leadership resources for our sales leaders so that they can act successfully on the ground, because they are way faster to respond to situations. They understand the context way better, all the nuances that are simply impossible to be managed or seen on a global central level. And then there will be a handover. For ourselves, we moved again into regional sales enablement, and we kind of at this stage splitted ourselves up a bit with 15 people. We also needed to professionalize and rethink our own structure. So we kind of have the front end department, which is concerned with onboardings, trainings, leadership development in regions. A global team department that focuses on all the cross-department alignment and projects, pilots, and global sales operations that is working mostly from the back end and on all the topics that need to be taken care of on a back end level. So we now just recently basically moved into the early stages of performing, where we make the move to become even more data driven and also drive data driven decision making with also our own business intelligence capabilities in the team. And also that is a transformation for us as well. When we speak about transforming culture of the sales team, again, we also need to constantly disrupt and transform ourselves. So we are also currently in a process of making everything we are doing data driven, measurable, and also building up on this and pursuing specific metrics. With the use of global project management tools, we were also able to basically get rid of meetings, or at least scale them down in a big way, and work more through processes, and also have shared visibility of the things we're doing, which I will come to in a moment. And ultimately, how we set ourselves up now is learning from the past, that yes, we do work, for example, with OKRs, objective and key results, but we always keep 30% of let's say buffer time, capacities for unforeseen and unexpected circumstances. And as expected, right, those are always filled out already. For us, it also means as a team structure that we also had to decide how do we want to lead, or how does this sales enablement team look like in the most effective way. There are two approaches. I can say I want a centralized team. That means I myself, as the head of sales enablement, I'm calling the shots, I'm making all the decisions, and everything has to be on my desk. Now, the reality is that with 16 different markets and 11 different languages and 90% of the company being here like for less than a year, like I can not be involved with everything, and a lot of things can happen and way beyond my reach. So it doesn't really make sense if we have a centralized decision-making structure in our team. The other extreme would be a decentralized approach. Obviously, I myself emotionally probably sentimental about this. I like a decentralized approach, but the reality is that also doesn't work if there is not a clear direction and a clear strategic outline on how we go about things, a shared common purpose and a shared culture, or shared objectives in general. What we ultimately aim for is a distributed network where we have strong nodes. That means sales enablement leadership in different parts, the VP of sales and others. And we are all also as team members across the different projects and sales operations, sales enablement, global and regional, connected and collaborate on the needs basis wherever it is required, and constantly keep this exchange going to basically be most agile in these environments. That ultimately meant to also align our team on a common purpose, that everybody in our team has the same shared common purpose and also understands what is going on. So there are many different ways of doing this. Don't want to go too much to details now, but many tools that we can also use to make sure that we understand what is going on. And based on that context, each of our team members can also do the right things according to the common purpose that we have, that we pursue. And this has turned out for us to be the most effective way of organizing ourselves, and also the most empowering way, because it allows us to move fast, respond fast. And I, for example, as a head of sales enablement, do not need to be involved in all the nitty-gritty details and decisions. I can trust my team members to execute in an empowered way based on understanding what is going on and according to the objectives that we pursue. A last word, as we are about to run out of time. In the sales enablement teams, or in any enablement team, we should always keep in mind that ultimately what drives the growth is other sales teams, and that also should be celebrated, should be recognized. They are the ones ultimately driving the growth. Their daily efforts, their heartbreaking efforts, where they go the extra mile, where they give everything 100,000% every single day. And as much as we talk about enablement, I think it's also important for us in any enablement team to always keep in mind whom we are doing this for, and also what these people are doing on a day-to-day basis to drive the success of the company. That's it from my side. If you have more questions, I'm sure Jack the Bono will direct you towards the resources. Thank you very much for taking the time for this presentation.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. Amazing presentation. We do actually have a few minutes left for questions. So we'll jump straight into the first one. So the first question here, Chris, is what are some of the key competencies that you have focused on as part of your sales enablement process, which is unique to the ed tech space?
Key competencies specifically with the focus on ed tech.
Yeah,
correct. EdTech as such deals with even more than any other business environment, right? With families, with students, with people who do not necessarily show up in a business environment. That means if I negotiate or sell to a businessman or businesswoman, it's a very different thing from selling to a family, a student. And what it requires here also on the sales enablement side is to understand those nuances and also to drive sales methodology, culture, and all kinds of processes towards that purpose. That, yeah, for example, you do not in the edtech sector, you might not need people who have 5 years experience in B2B sales. You might need people who have a really great social intelligence, empathy, and can connect to people and really understand what they're going through in order to offer them the right product. And then it's really driven by the product itself. So from key competencies, it's definitely these social skills, that because everything that we do in the sales enablement team, also who we are, kind of translates down into the trainings we do, into the onboardings we do, and with our, let's say, you could even say sales teams are our clients. We're kind of making sure that they are successful. We need to also make sure that they get the right resources and also with the right tonality. So I would definitely say those core skills and a passion for education, of course, because if we do not transmit this from an enablement side, it can never be translated from a sales team side to the customers.
Yeah, awesome answer. So next question here is, if you don't mind answering it, what metrics are you using as your KPIs?
So again, there are sales KPIs that the sales management managers are looking at, right? So we are obviously working on doing everything necessary to make those sales management KPIs happen, right? That's the KPIs that we are looking at kind of primarily. Now, what we're looking at in the sales enablement team, though, is very project related. if I'm looking at onboarding, I'm looking at ramp time. I want to know how fast does the new onboarded sales rep sell and how many days, because that says something about the quality or lack of quality of our onboarding. What is their total contract value, what they are selling in the first 4 weeks of being on the job, right? Now, if I look at pilot projects, I obviously want to see direct impacts in the KPIs. We're obviously constantly looking at growth. And I think also to answer that question from an enablement point of view, what I'm most interested in is, do I see consistency in the performance or do I see volatility? And do I also see a huge gap between performers, or do I see more homogeneous basically performance curves? If they're completely differing, then I have to ask myself, what is it that we are not giving to the lower performers? If you're having inconsistency, that means there's something that we have not done right in giving consistent methods and processes and systems to people. Because if somebody performs like this, there must be something lacking. And then this is also on us, because we onboarded those people, we trained them, we gave them the initial push, and now we need to figure out what it is that can be fixed.
Awesome answer again. And that does unfortunately bring us to time. I know there are a few more questions in the chat. So if you do have any more questions for Chris, please do feel free to reach out to him over on LinkedIn. And I'm sure that he'll be more than happy to answer any more questions and continue the conversation on over there. And I know there was a question about the possibility of getting slides at the end. Again, please feel free to reach out to Chris. And I'm sure that he will be more than happy to kind of share the slides or the content. With that said, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to present to us and answer the questions. And to everyone that tuned in, thank you. And we'll see you all very soon.
Thank you, everybody. See you around.
Bye, everyone.